This is the European history lecture for, and those of you who are taking the World War I test can take it as I lecture. Everyone else should have their notes out. This is the European history lecture for Monday, April 11th, 2022. We are looking upon the Treaty of Versailles, AD 1919. Yeah?
This is about the case study. So, last case study, we didn't have to do the historiography thing. What's that? That's actually where it was like
the last page.
That's
the last page is for AP.
No, not that last page. The other one.
The second last page. Like you have like a map.
Yeah.
Yeah, with like the map, you can like you put a map on it, and then it asks a couple questions.
And
about
you
it.
like you said the historiography.
Okay. To my knowledge, you have to do the entire profile.
What? But you said we.
I don't want to hear whether you like my decision or not. If it's in the profile, do it. If it's labeled AP, you don't have to do it.
But last time you told us like 3 days before it was due that we didn't have to do that part.
Yeah.
So.
Well, this time you got plenty of lead time. You were chose topics over a month ago.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm just asking.
Yes. No, I expect everything done.
Right.
Now, what you don't have to do is you don't have to write your essay if you don't want to, nor do you have to do a presentation if you don't want to. However, if you do want to, it's a great way of earning beaucoup extra credit and of also demonstrating greater knowledge and preparing for your senior project by going into even more depth. While she's testing, please leave her alone. Let her be on her own, isolated emotionally. Builds character. Okay, so, as I have said, this is the antithesis of the Congress of Vienna. Everything I said about the Congress of Vienna pretty much does not apply to the Treaty of Versailles. Congress of Vienna was the leaders of the European nations who had defeated Napoleon and, by extension, the French Revolutionary Order. They were interested in turning the clock back and then freezing time. In other words, going back to the extent possible and then initiating a political stasis. And to this effect, they were all unified. Even the new government of France, which was a return of the Bourbon monarchy, this time with a more distant relative of Louis XVI. Certainly not his son, because he was brutalized to death. The government of France was on board with turning back the time and preventing another revolution, because the victorious powers identified the French Revolution as the opening of Pandora's box and the source of the problems that led to the European General War, which Napoleon almost won. So there was broad agreement on what went wrong and what needs to be done to fix it. And the remedy was the Congress of Europe, a gathering together of the European great powers in common interest, much like everyone who lives in a particular apartment building has an interest in preventing fire and in announcing that there's a fire as quickly as possible and getting the fire department on the scene. Because if you don't, the fire will spread to your home and destroy it. Everyone who was a ruler of the nations after the Congress of Vienna had a mutual interest in deterring or limiting revolution. Because once revolution starts, you may start out trying to make another American revolution like Marquis de Lafayette did, but you'll end up with Robespierre chopping heads incessantly, and Marat calling for more and more heads on pikes as the solution to every problem. In 1919, the world situation and the leaders that gathered at Paris and at Versailles had no such consensus. Like the people who negotiated the treaty after the Napoleonic War, everyone had been affected by the First World War. In the victorious powers, there had been rationing. In the defeated powers, there had been starvation. In the victorious powers, there were a series of regulations. that up until now had never existed, the government controlling various aspects of everyday life. And this is true in the victorious and the defeated powers. Everyone had relatives, plural, who were maimed and or killed. So the same wellspring of misery was being drunk from by all the participants. However, there wasn't a common idea as to the cause of that misery or, therefore, the solution to that misery. More than that, the misery was ongoing. Because while there was peace in the West, the East was still at war, which we'll talk about. Now, might as well talk about it now. Okay. So, when Hungary is set up, it becomes a communist Soviet republic. Well, not really a republic, a communist Soviet state. So it is basically at war with the world around it, as is Bolshevik Russia. But that's not all. The Sykes-Picot Treaty gave a lot of what is today Western Turkey to the Greeks. And Constantinople was going to be made into either a Russian city, this is before the fall of the Tsar, or into some kind of international city that was going to be taken away from the Turks. But the Turks don't go along with that. In fact, even though the Ottomans are gone, the Turks have a national revival under a guy named Kemal Ataturk, and the modern nation of Turkey is born. And the Turks win. The Greeks are pushed back to the current borders along the Aegean Sea. And the former Russian Empire, it's got national separation, national uprisings, civil wars involving left-wing socialists and Bolsheviks and liberal Democrats and czarists and military officers and Cossacks and all sorts of things. Basically, imagine society in the Russian Empire before the World War, like Humpty Dumpty. And then instead of just falling, Humpty Dumpty not only fell, but Humpty Dumpty was knocked off with a giant ball-peen hammer. Shattered. And everything is flying around. In fact, the reason why I chose to do aspects of the Russian Civil War as my senior thesis at Bates College was because I was interested in seeing what would happen when a society completely falls apart. How people try to recreate order out of chaos, because anarchy is not for us. Oh, dude, anarchy would be... No, you moron. No. Anarchy may be great if everyone were philosophical, intellectual college students. But the world is not composed of intellectual college students. The world is composed of real flesh and blood people who don't like to live in a state of existential uncertainty. So, anarchy never lasts. It always results in some kind of return to order. And usually the new order is much harsher and more brutal than the old. Witness the Tsar's empire in Russia, which was oppressive by European standards. It was an old autocracy. But compared to the communists, the Tsar basically handed out Girl Scout cookies and invited people to the prom. It was not comparable. Communists, much more brutal, much more authoritarian. So, the fact that there is still existential doubt about what will be settled east of Germany and east of Greece and east of Austria is weighing on the people who are leading the Congress, the Treaty of Versailles, who are engaged in these talks. Plus, in addition to the European great powers, which were the only ones involved in the Congress of Vienna, you've got the Americans, you've got the dominions of the British Empire, including Canada and South Africa and Australia and New Zealand. You've got the Japanese Empire, you've got the Chinese Republic, which is really fractured into dozens of different warlord states. Yeah. So it's a lot more complex. It's a lot wider ranging. But the real problem is nobody understands there was not a common, clear understanding of what had gone wrong. And if you don't have a common, clear understanding of what had gone wrong, you can't fix it. You can't prevent it. It's not something simple like revolution leads to Napoleon. Let's stop revolution, we'll stop future Napoleons. That's not what happened in 1914. It's a much more complicated situation. So, what the Treaty of Versailles becomes is a tug of war between a group called the Big Four. And the Big Four, as I'll show you in a moment, are not by any means the only people at Versailles who are trying to make their policy positions come real. But they are the most powerful among them. So, can you get the right light switch, please, over there? Thank you. Mr. Smith. This monk is not one of the Big Four. Doing the rise of the Benedictine monks with my ancient students. I don't think I drew last year for you a tonsured monk. I'm sorry.
Very sad that I missed one.
Well, but you can get it now secondhand.
Alright.
Okay. So, what we want to do is look for the Big Four.
That's very, very.
See, that would have been funny if you said it louder.
I did, and it's all in
No,
caps.
I'm talking to sales.
Oh, am I interrupting on your conversation? Because I could care less about that. But if I am, I guess it would be nice to know.
He said a joke and it's funny or something. You would have appreciated it.
I'm sure I would have. Sam's humor is usually worth considering.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Okay. So,
Who are they?
here we have the Big Four.
They're pretty small. They are.
So,
Look how short he is.
they're all short by modern standards
He's like
because
my height.
modern people
He's small.
are not dwarves like Haley. I'm sorry.
It's because I'm Mexican.
Gnomes.
It's Yay.
Tell me, I've met tall Mexicans. I mean, Chewy, think about it. Chewy's a Mexican nickname. By the way, Mexicans don't like that joke when you make it, you know. Hey, Chewy, where's Han Solo? Oh, they don't like that. So, saw that in the movie because it's obnoxious. Here we have David Lloyd George, who's a Welshman. He's the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and the leader of the British Empire. This is Vittorio Orlando. Vittorio Orlando is the Prime Minister of Italy. And what he is certainly talking about is the Tyrol and Istria, which is the obsession of Signore Orlando. I love the little pointing gesture. Here you've got Georges Clemenceau, Le Tigre, the Tiger. Georges Clemenceau was a retired anti-Catholic French politician. By anti-Catholic, I mean secular. He wanted to destroy the Catholic Church's relationship with the French government. He wanted to end religious, I will call it. He wanted to end religious education in France. And he is an anti-German among anti-Germans. He is the most reliably anti-German politician in all of France.
He has an excellent moustache.
He does.
Do you think you could grow a moustache?
No. I can't do the walrus thing.
Okay.
I don't want to be. I can't. No.
How do you know if you have
I let my mustache grow, and there comes a point where I like getting my food without extra hair. And so, unless you can make your mustache do this and allow your food to come in, no, I don't like that. And finally, my least favorite president in the entire history of the United States of America, including Buchanan, who led to the Civil War.
Whoa.
Maybe not including the guy currently there, but, you know, story ain't over yet. Woodrow bleeping Wilson. Who started out life as a college professor and then became president of Princeton University, governor of New Jersey, and up until Franklin Roosevelt, the most effective progressive politician in American history. Thank him for the income tax when you start paying it. Because Wilson is the guy who set it up.
Thank you.
So anyway, this is the Big Four. And what the Big Four do is they dominate the rest of the proceedings. By the way, the Japanese love the fact that they're all white guys. The Japanese already are grumbling about the fact that Europeans and Americans and Aussies and so forth, all these Caucasians are basically anti-Asiatic racists, and they're beginning to claim that they are poor little Japan beset by evil racists, which they're going to use to justify the thousands of war crimes that they commit over the next 20, 25 years. And when I say thousands of war crimes, I'm not exaggerating. So, lights, you can turn them back on again. That's the Big Four. Okay. So we start with Mr. Wilson. This is a very Wilsonian treaty. Why? Because Estados Unidos, or État Uni, or the United States of America, is the most powerful economy on the globe. Really, the United States could have become the global hegemon in 1917, 1918, 1919. One of the reasons World War II happens is we step away and we say, no, we don't want to be the world's policeman. We'll get to that. But for the moment, Wilson is not only the head of the dominant world economy, but Wilson, up until this point, has spoken like a genuine idealist. Peace without victory. His 14 points that will guide a peace without victory. So the Germans surrender in part because they think they're going to get a peace without victory. In other words, they won't be treated like a defeated power. However, let's look at some of Wilson's ideas. First of all, Wilson is an absolute rationalist. Like any good college professor, he believes that problems can all be solved by logic and reason. And I say this with some degree of derision because it's Wilson and it's me, and I can't help it. But I also say it this way because the thing you've got to understand about the colleges that most or all of you are going to go to is they're not real. They are a fantasy land of cloud cuckoo ideas. They are not reality. College professors generally have precious little experience outside of the ivory tower. What they are teaching you is based on theoretical knowledge or book learning, not practical knowledge or street smarts. So Wilson has this idea that he has analyzed European history and he's figured it out. How do you figure out a continent's history? Well, you see, here's the answer. Unrequited national ambition leads people to righteous anger. Unrequited national ambition leads people to righteous anger. I am a Bloopherian, and as a Bloopherian, I am under the rule of the Carthaginians. My Bloopherian ways are being suppressed by the Carthaginians. I can't speak my Bloopherian language. I have to send my kids to schools where Carthaginian is taught as the default language. We can't have our holidays. We can't have our particular kind of church. There are Carthaginian troops marching through our cities and running our police forces. I am a second-class citizen in my own land, my own ancestral home. This is going to make me angry. Very, very angry indeed. And that anger will lead to violence, wars, revolutions, and so forth. So, Wilson concludes, if unrequited national ambitions, the desire for every nation to have its own state or its own country, is the cause of European wars. And Wilson is absolutely certain it is. And by the way, he has a point. I'm not saying he's completely wrong about this, but because he's figured it out, he's going to apply a solution, like a doctor giving medication to a condition. What Wilson believes in is called national self-determination. Every nation of people should have its own country, in theory. It's like every teenager should have his own bedroom. Or every idea should have its own paragraph. This is, by the way, the biggest criticism I have of writing from sophomores. Is you get these gigantor paragraphs that have 8 or 9 or 10 different ideas. Don't do that. Short, punchy paragraphs. Each paragraph has its own idea. Much easier to read. Reading some of the essays, if they are not broken up by me, is like reading ancient Roman, where they don't make spaces between words or sentences or use punctuation or have lowercase letters. It's just harder to read. You are more persuasive if you have smaller paragraphs. Each paragraph has its own idea. Each teenager should have his own or her own bedroom. And each nation should have its own country. You understand the difference between a nation and a country? Because I'll explain it if you don't. A nation is like a culture, a group of people bound together by certain core beliefs. That's a nation. Another word for nation is tribe or people. So, when does a nation get its independence? When there is a national state, a nation state, or a country that is drawn so that its borders, which are kind of important to have a country, current events, that its borders show where the majority of people are Bliptherian, as opposed to Kakaknian, or whatever I said. So if my nation has properly drawn borders, it is a place where people like me live, and we rule ourselves and govern our own affairs. Okay? There's a problem with this. Lots of nations are really small. They don't control a lot of land. And there's multiculturalism, which confuses everything in Eastern Europe. Everything in Eastern Europe. Everything in Eastern Europe. So you end up with a lot of possible micro-states the size of postage stamps. And then comes, how do you divide a multicultural zone among its various constituencies? I did. And if you felt psychic pain, that's because this whole idea, this whole notion of national self-determination will give you a headache. It's like quantum mechanics. Anyone who says, yeah, I understand quantum mechanics is easy. No! You don't. It's not merely anti-reality. It's more complicated than that. Quantum mechanics, God, it makes no sense. And yet, it doesn't make any sense. So, how is Wilson going to deal with the reality that, let's say we're talking about Croatia. Croatia's got problems because it's in the Balkans, which means it's in a multicultural zone. And Croatia's little tiny place right up here near Istria in the Balkan mountain range. It's small. How can Croatia punch in the same league as Italy, or France, or Germany, or Britain, or Spain, or Russia, or even Hungary? How? Little tiny Croatia. It's like midget wrestling. You know, when you have midget wrestlers go into the ring with real wrestlers, who are usually 6.5 feet tall plus, you end up with, like killer whales playing with seals as they kill them. It's just sick. No, there's a reason why they broadcast midget wrestling. I'm sure in this political correct age, they call it something other than midget wrestling, but it's midget wrestling. You get these little guys, and they're in their tights, and they walk around, and
Can I do midget wrestling?
no, you're too tall.
Oh.
Rather uncouth
I love
people
hearing that.
laugh at that because they think it's funny. The thing is, Croatia, being small, is a midget wrestler in terms of its national strength. If Roberta were here, I would point out, God bless it, I love Lithuania, but Lithuania is a midget wrestler too. It's a very small country. And there's a problem with this. So how is Wilson going to solve the problem of microstates? Oh, no, he is. His problem solver is the League of Nations. And with the League of Nations, it's not going to matter if you're a tiny little country or a big, massive country, if you're Croatia or Germany, because as members of the League of Nations, there's a place where you can work out your differences peacefully. And there is going to be a burgeoning, that is a growing international law and international world order.
That sounds smart.
It does sound. It sounds so smart. It sounds so rational. And if people were primarily rational beings, it might have even worked. But, so, what Wilson proposes is to divide up Eastern Europe into microstates, many of them, not all of them. Yugoslavia is the opposite of a microstate. Yugoslavia is a combination of Serbia, Montenegro, parts of Bosnia, and a bunch of others. Kosovo, Macedonia, which the Greeks say is not Greek. Basically, Wilson's ideas are going to apply, except in Yugoslavia. And these little tiny countries will be protected by the universal global order of the League of Nations. That's his solution. It's the same reason, by the way, that that during the time of the European Union, you have regions like Catalonia, which is basically northeastern Spain. It's not even the old Kingdom of Aragon, it's smaller than that. The area around the city of Barcelona, once independence from Hispania, from Spain. And the Catalans, or the Catalonians, have been trying for decades to have their own country. And their argument is, we don't need to be a very big, strong country because we're part of the EU. We'll just be a region of the European Union, and we don't have to protect ourselves because the European Union will do it for us. To which the Spaniards say, shut up, you're staying in Spain. And so far, that's been the answer. The Spaniards have told the Catalans no, and they've backed it up with military force, and thus far it hasn't gotten too violent. Too violent. There's a bit of terrorism. Not too much. By the same logic, you can have a bunch of really weak little countries in the European Union, but their strength doesn't come from their individuality, it comes from the unity of the EU. So Wilson's idea is tiny little microstates, if that's what it takes to get national self-determination, with a global order, the League of Nations. So let's see what comes out of this. Okay, well, first of all, Greece's border is extended to here. So this is all Greece now. Turkey is going to keep its European area, so that's going to remain. Let's see. Yugoslavia basically becomes this entire area, except Albania. So Albania and Yugoslavia is the exception. It's not a national self-determination thingy. It is an empire of different peoples who basically can be called Southern Slavs. So all of this is now Yugoslavia. Bulgaria remains Bulgaria, but it loses some territory because it was on Germany's side. Romania was on the Allied side. So Romania gets Transylvania, where Dracula comes from,
Oh, yeah.
takes it from Hungary, And it gets Moldova and what is called Bessarabia. Bessarabia and Moldova. So Romania practically doubles in size. Poland.
Is he gonna come back?
Poland is going to get the regions of Posen and West Prussia from Germany. Germany will keep East Prussia, but lose Memel. And Germany will also lose the city of Danzig, which will become an international city. And Poland also wins a war with the Soviets. We'll talk about that. So Poland takes a bunch of area that's now part of the Ukraine, of White Russia, of Lithuania. They also take Galicia. So Poland is now going to be huge. Huge. Here's Lithuania. Here's Latvia. And Estonia's up there, and then there's Finland. What?
What's Memel?
Memel is the city up here in East Prussia that goes to Lithuania.
Okay.
That's what Memel is.
Sounds like a piece of rock.
Oh, it does. Now,
Like a rock.
Italy wants the Tyrol here, and Istria here, and the city of Fiume there. Well, the thing about Italy is it doesn't get all of what it wants, and consequently Orlando's government falls and is replaced by Mussolini. They do get some of the Tyrol. They do get Istria. But they don't get Fiume. That goes to Yugoslavia. And the Italians are fuming about it. Yes, I said that. Switzerland doesn't change in size. Its neutral bankers remain neutral in banking. The Franco-Spanish border remains the same. However, the French border is going to remain the same with Belgium and Luxembourg. They both remain the same. However, they're going to get back Alsace-Lorraine.
That's the cool little, like...
That's the area that Germany took from France in 1871. So Germany's lost some territory there.
Isn't that like...
There are some minor changes along the Dutch and Belgian frontiers favoring Holland and Belgium, but basically this border stays the same. And Denmark is getting part of Schleswig back. Now, the Germans keep their border with the former Austrian lands for the most part. However, there's an area near the Rhine River and this area is going to be demilitarized. That means no army, no navy, no military bases of any kind. And American and Allied troops are going to occupy this area and police it. Oh, where else? That's mostly it. Off the map, Finland is going to get its independence from Russia. That's a big deal, but I don't have room on the map for it. Oh! And as a result of other events, the Republic, or should I say the Irish Free State, is established in Southern Ireland, but Northern Ireland remains part of Britain. So, there's that in terms of new borders. I suppose I might as well just say, yeah, Andorra is still there, Monaco is still there, and the border with Portugal, which I do badly, is still there. There. So, oh, I almost forgot. This is kind of important. Czechoslovakia.
Oh, yeah.
Not a single nation,
Yes.
but a bunch of little nations fused together. The Czechs and the Slovaks don't even like each other very much.
Czechoslovakia.
Yeah. And we've got Hungary and we've got Austria, which I'm just going to divide like this. So, does the map look a little different?
No.
Just a
Just a tad? Just a scotch?
I don't really know why.
Yeah. So, we're going to leave things there until tomorrow. Oh, yes, and Holland and Belgium are not the same country. Thank you. Come again.
Have a good night.